Welcome to the second training video in our Matching Student Needs to Accessibility Resources training series. In the previous video, we explored why it is important to use accessibility resources to minimize challenges to learning. We also briefly introduced the concept of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, as a framework for helping to maximize opportunities for learning. Now that we have a clear understanding of why accessibility resources are important, let's take a few minutes to explore the what, or the wide variety of accessibility resources provided on the CASP and LPAC, and some tools to help you improve their use in your schools and LEAs. A core principle of California's assessments is accessibility for all students who take the tests. In the last video, we discussed some of the challenges the diverse students served in California schools might encounter during daily classroom instruction and on assessments. Accessibility resources provided on the CASP and LPAC ensure equitable access for students with diverse accessibility needs and preferences. The CASP and LPAC are designed so that students who take them, including students who are learning English or have special needs, can participate in the tests meaningfully and demonstrate what they know and can do. As a result, the assessments include accessibility resources that address a variety of access challenges, allowing all students to show what they know and can do. California students demonstrate a wide variety of skills, abilities, and interests, as well as varying levels of proficiency in English and other languages. They come from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds, have different experiences, and live in various socioeconomic circumstances. While the population in your LEA may vary slightly from the state makeup, I think you would agree that all schools in California serve a widely diverse student population. While this great variation of student population enriches the learning experiences of all students, it can also make teachers' work more complex. Teachers in California schools must strive to provide high-quality curricula and instruction that is sensitive and attentive to the needs of all students. As you may know, the English Learner Roadmap was approved as state policy in 2017 and provides guidance to LEAs on welcoming, understanding, and educating the diverse population of students who are English learners attending California public schools. As noted here, Principle 3 of this policy, system conditions that support effectiveness, calls for the use of valid assessments to inform instruction for English learners. By using valid assessments, educators can be better informed of English learners' strengths and instructional needs. Let's begin by defining accessibility. Access and fairness are issues for all students when it comes to learning and testing. Students with specific learning needs may require accessibility resources during instruction and on assessments so that they can validly demonstrate mastery of content. It's about ensuring all students have access. Some examples of this are test items that require extensive reading even when the construct being measured is not reading, or requiring students with fine motor difficulties to handwrite their answers to essay questions when keyboarding could just as easily be used. Federal legislation defines and supports the application of universal design principles to improve fairness on all state and LEA-wide achievement tests. Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is a concept for designing products and services in such a way that they are usable by people with the widest possible range of functional capabilities, thus reducing the need for assistive technology or accommodations. An example of UDL applied to testing is allowing enough time for all students, including students with disabilities or specific learning needs. All students should have the time they need to complete each assessment. The CASP and LPAC were developed using the principles of UDL and with the recognition of the diverse characteristics and needs of students who participate in these assessments. To ensure that all students' accessibility needs are met, Smarter Balanced created a series of accessibility resources based on the tenets of UDL. The resources are divided into 3 categories: universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations. We'll discuss these categories in greater detail in a moment. A primary purpose of the CASP and LPAC is to improve everyday classroom teaching and learning. We want all students to have equal opportunities to access content material and to accurately demonstrate what they know and are able to do. By using the principles of UDL, the CASP and LPAC, including the alternate assessments, have included resources that address visual, auditory, and physical access challenges, allowing virtually all students to demonstrate what they know and can do. Smarter Balance provides accessibility resources to students to use during classroom instruction and on assessments. There's a wide range of instructional strategies, resources, and tools that can be used in daily instruction and on classroom assessments to help students access the intended and tested curriculum. Teachers can be flexible in the way they present content, the way students demonstrate their learning, and the ways that they design student engagement activities. This type of flexibility does not always exist on a standardized test. While many allowable resources mirror those provided during instruction, only resources listed in the California Assessment Accessibility Resources Matrix that do not change the construct are available on the CASP and LPAC. This is a major difference between how accessibility resources may be used in the classroom versus on statewide assessments. The statewide assessment system uses a multi-level approach to providing accessibility resources for students, similar to the MTSS or multi-tiered system of supports framework that some of you may be familiar with and are using in your schools and LEAs. First, universal tools are practices, tools, and resources that have been added to our accessibility vocabulary and are available to all students on the basis of their individual choice and preference. They are similar to universal supports in the MTSS framework. An example of a universal tool is the highlighter resource. Some students might find that the use of a highlighter can be helpful to identify important words in a text. Second, designated supports are additional resources to support all students with a range of needs. They are similar to the supplemental supports in the MTSS framework that are available to all students for whom a need has been identified by an adult who is familiar with the student's instructional needs. Text-to-speech is a designated support that reads aloud text for students via embedded text-to-speech technology. The support can be used to support struggling readers or students who are blind and do not yet have adequate Braille skills. Finally, accommodations have been available and used in both instruction and assessment for a number of years, and most of you are probably familiar with these as resources to support students with disabilities or students with individualized education programs or IEPs and Section 504 plans. They are similar to the intensified supports in the MTSS framework. It's important to remember that the use of approved accessibility resources does not affect the student's score. Speech to text is an example of an accommodation. This support can benefit students who have motor or processing disabilities, such as dyslexia, or who have had a recent injury, such as a broken hand or arm, that makes it difficult to produce text or commands using computer keys, and who may need alternate ways to work with computers. So I want to offer a reminder. This has been mentioned previously. The use of approved accessibility resources for any CASP or LPAC assessment does not I repeat, does not affect student score, nor does it count against an LEA for its participation rate. Note that LEAs can also request the use of unlisted resources. Unlisted resources are not universal tools, designated support, or accommodations. They can be made available if specified in a student's IEP and only on approval by the California Department of Education, or the CDE. The CDE has pre-identified non-embedded unlisted resources for statewide assessments that do change the construct being measured. These are identified in the unlisted resources for CASP and LPAC's guide. This guide provides information about who can use the unlisted resources, how to request an unlisted resource, and the impact on student scores. The TOMS video tutorial on how to request an unlisted resource provides information on requirements, as well as the methods used to request an unlisted resource in the Test Operations Management System, or TOMS. LEA coordinators should watch this tutorial to find out how to request an unlisted resource in TOMS for the CASP and the LPAC assessments. Keep in mind that alternate assessments are designed with flexibility in mind. IEP teams should be aware of the CASP or LPAC accountability ramifications of assigning an unlisted resource that changes the construct being tested. For the LPAC, the IEP or Section 504 team may decide to exempt a student from a domain if there are no available resources or unlisted resources that provide the student access to that specific domain. Guidance on exemptions for the LPAC domains is as follows. For an overall score to be generated, a student must be assessed with the LPAC in at least one domain for both the oral and written language composites. In the event that the IEP team decides it is necessary to exempt the student from 2 or more domains, the team should consider the use of an alternate assessment to the LPAC. For each of the CASP and LPAC tests, the CDE has created an at-a-glance graphic that shows the accessibility resources that are available for each of the assessments. We are using modified examples to give you an idea of what information to find on these documents. It's important to note that the availability and categorization of a particular resource may vary from assessment to assessment. For example, a particular resource may be considered a universal tool on one assessment, but a designated support on another. These graphics are helpful tools to keep such distinctions clear. The top 2 sections highlight the resources available to all students, with universal tools listed on the left and designated supports listed on the right. The bottom portions are specific to students with IEPs or Section 504 plans. The box in the bottom left corner lists accommodations available to those students, and the box in the bottom right-hand corner describes the resources that are available to students taking the California alternate assessments. For the LPAC, the 2 boxes on the bottom right described what unlisted resources and domain exemptions are. The categories of the accessibility resources are the same for all content areas, but specific resources available vary somewhat depending on the content area, as I previously mentioned. You may notice that within each section, there are subsets of resources called embedded and non-embedded. Embedded resources are those provided to students within the computer testing interface. For example, the digital notepad is provided to students through the test delivery system, so students can make notes about a test item. Non-embedded resources, on the other hand, are those that must be provided to students outside of the testing interface. Providing students with scratch paper outside of the test delivery system to take notes is an example of a non-embedded resource. Some resources may be things you have heard about or used in an instructional context, but not necessarily within the assessment. For example, you may have used masking in the classroom with a piece of cardstock, but this resource will look very different on the computer-based assessment administration. These accessibility resource graphics are available on the resource webpage. Another reference document made available by the CDE is called the California Assessment Accessibility Resource Matrix. You may have noticed while reviewing the graphics that the availability of some accessibility resources varies by content area. As we stated earlier, there is variability in which resources may be used on particular sections of the CASP and LPAC. The matrix is an important document that provides detailed information on each accessibility resource, noting which resources may be used for different content areas and grade levels. The matrix is organized into 5 parts. Part 1 lists each of the tools available to all students on the basis of student preference and selection. Part 2 lists the designated supports available to all students when determined by an educator or team of educators. Part 3 lists the available accommodations if specified in a student's IEP or Section 504 plan. Part 4 lists instructional supports and resources for the California alternate assessments and alternate LPAC, the tests taken by students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Part 5 identifies unlisted resources, which are accessibility resources that might be indicated in a student's IEP, but are not listed as an available accommodation. This document is updated each academic year. This year's document is currently under review and will be posted soon. Another resource that is available for you is the CASP and LPAC Accessibility Guide for Online Testing. This manual provides information for classroom teachers, English development educators, special education teachers, and related services personnel to use in selecting and administering universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations for those students who might need them. This manual also helps LEA and site coordinators provide assistance in selecting resources. This manual emphasizes an individualized approach to the implementation of assessment practices for all students, as all students have diverse needs as they participate in the various CASP and LPAC assessments. At the same time, it supports important daily and ongoing instructional decisions about accessibility and accommodations for all students, as it recognizes a critical connection between accessibility and accommodations in instruction and during assessment. You may notice that this guide has a direct link to demonstration videos, which are really helpful in becoming familiar with some of the resources. For example, this is a demonstration video of an embedded accessibility resource, Masking, for the California assessments. There are many more demonstration videos that educators, parents, or guardians, and students can view in both English and Spanish. For a complete list of demonstration videos and other resources, you can visit the demonstration videos webpage, which is linked on your resources. Now that you understand the accessibility types, let's look a little more closely at the accessibility categories available on the CASP and LPAC, so we can start thinking about how their use can help students overcome some of the learning challenges they may be facing. Resources included in the CASP and LPAC fall into these three basic categories based on the Universal Design for Learning principles. There are resources that support students to remain engaged with the assessment. For example, by providing breaks, maybe a separate setting, or even noise buffers. There are also resources that support students by varying the way the assessment is presented. For example, all or parts of the assessment might be translated for an English learner, or the assessment might be read aloud to struggling readers through text-to-speech. And finally, there are also resources that support students by allowing them to respond through various actions and expressions, such as through an adaptive keyboard or by using a scribe. While not all student accessibility resources will transfer exactly as might be provided in the classroom, the CASP and LPAC are understood to be the most forward-thinking in terms of accessibility resources provided to ensure student access. It's important to note that only tools available as embedded resources that do not change the construct of the assessment item are available for use on the CASP and LPAC. A major difference between how accessibility resources may be used in the classroom versus on the CASP, summative, and interim assessments, as well as the initial and summative LPAC. Most important for our discussion today, these resources are available to a broad range of students on the basis of identified student need. Thinking about the nature of student needs can help determine which types of resources might best support them. So given what we've discussed so far, I'd like for you to consider for a moment the resource of breaks. Which principle do you think might fit breaks best? As a reminder, the CASP and LPAC define a break as follows. Breaks may be given at predetermined intervals or after completion of a domain level assessment. Sometimes students are allowed to take breaks when individually needed to reduce cognitive fatigue, when they experience heavy assessment demands. So, some possible answers you may have considered could be engagement, because taking breaks helps with sustaining effort and self-regulation. It might also fit with action and expression because it can allow for physical movement and provide executive function options. Please keep in mind that resources may shift categories from universal tools to accommodations depending on the subject and grade level. Finally, let's consider the accommodation of read aloud for passages in English language arts. Given what we've discussed so far, which principle do you think fits read aloud best? Some possible answers you may have come up with could be engagement, because it helps with sustaining effort and providing relevance by removing a language barrier. Could also be representation, because it provides clarity for language and comprehension. It's important to identify students' literacy skills in their primary language to help determine whether some resources might help or hinder these students. Also, just as a reminder that while read aloud is an accommodation for reading passages in English language arts, it is considered a designated support for mathematics stimuli and items, and for ELA items.